The first sound I remember from that dinner was my sister laughing. Not a warm laugh, not the kind that lifts a room. It was sharp, too loud, edged with something brittle. It cut through the clink of silverware and the low murmur of conversation like a knife across porcelain. My son's question was still hanging in the air when she did it. "Grandma, Grandpa, could I borrow $80,000? He said it carefully. I remember that. His shoulders were tense, his voice steady but soft, like he was bracing for a blow he already expected. He had rehearsed it. I knew because I had watched him pace the hallway earlier, rubbing his palms on his jeans, whispering numbers to himself like a prayer. $80,000. Every word spelled out in my head as if the universe wanted to make sure I felt the weight of it. My sister leaned back in her chair, wine glass dangling from two manicured fingers, and laughed again. This time she didn't even bother to hide it. "Oh my God," she said, "you're serious." The table went quiet. My mother froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My father stared down at his plate as if the answer might be etched into the china. My brother-in-law smirked, the corner of his mouth lifting in that familiar way that always made my skin crawl. I felt my chest tighten, not from the money, from the humiliation. This was supposed to be a simple family dinner. Just another Sunday night in my parents' house, the one with the long dining table my grandmother bought decades ago, the one everyone said would someday be mine because I was the daughter who stayed close. The daughter who showed up. The daughter who never asked for anything. My son had not planned to ask tonight. That part matters. He had tried everything else first. Loans, scholarships, grants, side jobs, overtime shifts that left him coming home at midnight with grease on his hands and circles under his eyes. This was the last door left, and my sister had decided to slam it shut with a laugh. $80,000, she repeated, rolling the words around her mouth like candy. For what exactly? Another one of your little ideas. My son flushed. His ears went red. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at me. Not for permission, for strength. "It's not an idea," he said finally. "It's the buy-in, for the partnership." My sister snorted. "Oh, sweetheart, you mean the business that hasn't even opened yet?" I felt something inside me crack. I had known this moment would come. Not this exact question, not this number spoken out loud at a dinner table under warm lights and polite smiles, but this reckoning. This exposure, this reminder of where my place was in this family. Second place, always second. I cleared my throat. "He's been accepted," I said. "It's legitimate. He has paperwork." My sister turned her eyes on me then. Cold, assessing. The same look she used when we were children, and she wanted something I had. "And you expect Mom and Dad to just write a check?" she asked. "After everything?" "Everything, that word again." My mother finally spoke. "Let's not do this right now." But it was already done. Because what my sister really meant was this. After all the money they had already given me, after all the chances they had already wasted on my side of the family, after all the quiet judgments that had been tallying up for years, my father cleared his throat. $80,000 is a lot of money. He didn't look at my son when he said it. He looked at me. I nodded. "I know." What I didn't say was that my sister had borrowed more than that without ever calling it a loan. What I didn't say was that her wedding alone had cost more than my yearly salary at the time. What I didn't say was that my parents had quietly paid off her credit card debt twice and called it helping family. What I didn't say was that this wasn't about money at all. It was about worth. My sister leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Maybe," she said sweetly now, "this is a lesson. You can't always get bailed out. That's life." I looked at my son. His jaw was tight. His eyes were glassy, but dry. He wasn't going to cry. He had learned that early. Tears only gave people permission to dismiss you. "We would pay it back," he said, "every dollar." My brother-in-law laughed under his breath. "With what income?" That was it. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I had spent my entire adult life smoothing things over, making myself smaller so my sister could feel bigger, explaining away my parents' favoritism as concern, swallowing my resentment because family was supposed to be sacred. I thought about all the holidays where my sister's name was etched into the center of the table and mine was penciled in on the edge. All the birthdays forgotten. All the praise handed out selectively like rationed food in a war zone. I thought about the inheritance conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the will no one ever showed me, the family business meetings I was never invited to because I wouldn't be interested. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Everyone looked at me now. "We're done," I said. My mother gasped. "Sit down." "No," I said. My voice was steady. That surprised me. "We're done asking. And we're done explaining." My sister raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what exactly do you think you're going to do?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. The diamond necklace, the tailored dress, the confidence that came from knowing the ground under her feet was solid because someone else had poured the concrete. "I'm going to remember this," I said. She smiled. "You always do." She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. Because as I reached for my son's coat and felt his hand tremble in mine, I made a quiet promise to myself. Not out of anger, not out of spite, out of clarity. They had drawn the line, publicly, cruelly, without shame. And once a family shows you exactly where you stand, the only thing left to do is decide how you're going to move when the tables turn. They didn't know it yet, but this dinner would have cost them far more than $80,000. I did not sleep that night. That isn't a metaphor. I didn't drift in and out or lie awake staring at the ceiling in some poetic haze. I stayed awake, fully. Every minute sharp and conscious, like my body knew something important had shifted and refused to shut down until my mind caught up. My son sat at the kitchen table long after midnight scrolling on his phone without really seeing it. I made tea, neither of us drank. The house felt too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. "I shouldn't have asked," he finally said. The words landed heavier than the laughter had. I turned to him. "Don't do that." He shrugged the same way he used to when he was little and trying to pretend he wasn't hurt. It was stupid. I knew how they'd react. That was the part that burned. Not my sister's cruelty, not my parents' silence, but the fact that my son had expected it. That he had walked into that room already braced for humiliation because he had learned slowly and painfully how our family worked. "This wasn't your failure," I said. "It was theirs." He gave me a thin smile. "Mom, they don't see it that way." I reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were cold. "I know," I said, "but they will." He looked at me then, really looked. Something changed in his expression. Not hope, something steadier, something quieter. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Yes." He hesitated. "You don't have the money either." I nodded. "I know." "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, the plan hadn't fully formed yet. All I had was a sense of direction, a memory resurfacing, a door I had once closed quietly behind me because I thought it was safer not to knock. "I'm going to stop pretending," I said. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove past my parents' house without stopping. Instead, I took the highway west toward the industrial side of town, where the buildings still carried the names of companies that no longer existed. Places people forgot about unless they needed something from them. The sign was faded but familiar. I parked, sat in the car for a long moment, then got out. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. The receptionist looked up surprised. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here to see Mr. Calder." She frowned. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said. "But he'll want to see me." She studied my face, then picked up the phone. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. He looked older, so did I. That felt fair. "Well," he said slowly, "I'll be damned." "You always said I'd be back," I replied. He smiled. "I hoped. I didn't expect." He leaned back in his chair. "What changed?" I told him about the dinner, about the laughter, about the loan, about the way my parents had stared at the table instead of standing up for their grandson. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once. "They finally showed their hand," he said. "Yes. And you're ready to stop protecting them." That wasn't a question. "I am." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder thick with dust and age. "I never threw this away," he said. "Didn't seem right." I stared at it. My name was still on the tab. Inside were contracts, emails, old projections. Proof of something I had almost convinced myself never existed. "You were never just an assistant," he said. "You were a partner. You walked away before it paid off." I swallowed. "I walked away because my mother said family didn't sue family." He gave a humorless laugh. "Funny how that rule only goes one way." By the time I left, my hands were shaking. Not with fear, with recognition. On the drive home, my phone rang. My sister. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. My mother. Then a text from my father, just 3 words. "We need to talk." I did not respond. That afternoon, I pulled a box from the back of my closet, the one I hadn't opened since my divorce. Old files, bank statements, legal correspondence I had stopped reading halfway through, because it hurt too much to understand what I had given up. I spread everything across the dining table, and there it was, clear as day. The family business, the one my sister bragged about, the one my parents referred to as their legacy. My name was on the foundation paperwork, buried, quiet, undervalued, but unmistakable. I remembered the meeting where my father had told me it was simpler if ownership stayed with him and my sister. I remembered signing documents I hadn't fully read because I trusted him. I remembered how relieved they all looked when I said I didn't want to be involved anymore. I had mistaken relief for concern. That evening, my son came home from work and stopped short when he saw the table. "What's all this?" "History," I said, "and leverage." He picked up a document, eyes widening. "Mom, this says—" "I know," I said. He sat down slowly. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I thought walking away made me the bigger person." He shook his head. "It just made them comfortable." That night, my sister posted photos from a charity gala, smiling, toasting, captioned with a quote about family values. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I opened my laptop and sent an email I had never planned to write. To a lawyer. Subject line simple, direct. Question about ownership and recovery options. I did not sleep much the second night either. But this time it wasn't because of humiliation. It was because for the first time in years, I could see the shape of what was coming. And I knew deep in my bones that the people who had laughed across that dinner table had no idea what they had just awakened. The lawyer's office was smaller than I expected. Not the polished glass and steel space my sister's attorneys favored, the kind designed to intimidate before a single word was spoken. This place was quiet, wood shelves, soft light. A framed photograph of a courthouse from decades ago yellowed at the edges. The woman who shook my hand looked me straight in the eye and didn't smile until I finished telling her why I was there. "I'm going to be very clear," she said once I stopped talking. "You did not imagine this." I felt my shoulders drop an inch. She slid the documents back toward me. "Your name appears on multiple foundational filings, not as a courtesy, as a contributor." My heart pounded, but I signed away my involvement. "You signed away operational control," she corrected, "not ownership, and certainly not compensation for intellectual property or early capital contribution." I stared at her. "Why would they let that happen?" She didn't hesitate, "Because they didn't think you'd ever look." There it was, the quiet truth beneath years of polite neglect. My parents had not erased me out of malice. They had erased me out of convenience. My sister had simply benefited from it. "What does that mean now?" I asked. "It means," she said carefully, "that you have options. Several." On the drive home, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my brother. "You're being dramatic. Mom's upset. Call her." I deleted it. That evening I cooked dinner slowly, intentionally. The smell of onions softening in olive oil filled the kitchen. It grounded me. My son watched from the doorway, quiet. "They're scared," he said. "They should be," I replied, then caught myself. "No," I corrected. "They're confused. They've never seen me move without asking permission." The lawyer called the next morning. "I pulled public records," she said. "Your sister recently leveraged the company for expansion." My stomach tightened. "Debt?" "Yes, significant." She paused. "And she personally guaranteed part of it." I laughed once, short and surprised. Of course she did. For years, my sister had strutted like someone who could never fall. Turns out she was standing on borrowed money. "They're vulnerable," the lawyer continued. "If you assert your stake now, it complicates everything." That afternoon, my mother showed up at my door unannounced. She looked smaller than usual. Older. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, as if control itself might slip if she loosened it. "We need to talk," she said, echoing my father's message from the day before. I didn't invite her in. We stood on the porch. "You embarrassed us," she said without preamble. I almost laughed. "At dinner," I asked, "or in general?" Her lips thinned. "Your son put us in an impossible position." "No," I said quietly. "He exposed one." She sighed the way she always did when she wanted to end a conversation without resolving it. "You know how your sister is. She didn't mean anything by it." I looked at her. Really looked. The woman who had taught me to bake bread, to say please and thank you, to never borrow more than you could repay. "She meant exactly what she said," I replied. "And so did you." Her eyes flickered. "We've done a lot for you." "Yes," I said. "You've kept me close enough to be useful and far enough away to be forgotten." She stiffened. "That's not fair." "I know," I said. "Neither is rewriting history." Silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, "Your father and I are reviewing the will." There it was, the quiet threat, the unspoken power play. I smiled. That surprised her. "Good," I said. "Make sure it's accurate." She stared at me, unsettled. "You're making a mistake," she warned. "I already made one," I replied. "Years ago. I won't repeat it." That night, my sister sent me a message. We need to clear the air. I typed back 2 words. We will, but not yet. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It isn't reactive. It doesn't announce itself at the dinner table. It waits. It documents. It lets people continue believing the story they've told themselves until the truth has enough weight to collapse it. A week later, the lawyer filed a notice. Not a lawsuit, not yet, just a formal assertion of interest. The response from my sister's company was immediate. Emergency meeting scheduled, all stakeholders required to attend. I wasn't on the invite list, but I was copied. My sister called within minutes. What are you doing? She hissed. I'm participating, I said. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said calmly. I'm finally putting it in proportion. She lowered her voice. Mom and Dad will never forgive you. I thought about my son's face at that dinner table. The laugh, the silence. I've already been forgiven for less, I said, and punished for more. She hung up on me. I sat at the kitchen table afterwards, staring at nothing, my pulse steady. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their moves. I was setting the board. And somewhere between that quiet moment and the next sunrise, I realized something that would carry me through everything that followed. They had always assumed I would back down. They had built their lives on that assumption. Soon they would learn what happens when the person you underestimate finally decides to collect. The emergency meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 9 sharp. I knew because my sister called me 3 times the night before to tell me I was not invited. You don't work there, she said, each word clipped. You have no role. I let her talk herself hoarse before I answered. I'm an owner, I said. That is a role. She went quiet, not angry quiet, calculating quiet. That was when I knew she was scared. I didn't attend the meeting in person. I didn't need to. My lawyer did that for me. She sat at the table with my name on a placard printed at the last minute, slipped between 2 executives who had no idea who I was or why I suddenly mattered. But I listened. I listened through a secure call while sitting at my own kitchen table, coffee untouched, hands folded like I was in church. My sister opened the meeting with confidence she didn't feel. I could hear it in the way her voice pitched just a fraction higher than usual. She spoke about growth, about expansion, about vision. Then my lawyer cleared her throat. I'd like to address ownership, she said. The room shifted, papers rustled, someone coughed. She laid it out calmly. The documents, the filings, the early-stage contributions, the intellectual property I had developed back when the company was nothing more than a rented office and a borrowed printer. My sister interrupted. That's ancient history. History doesn't expire, my lawyer replied. I smiled. By the time the call ended, nothing had been resolved, but everything had changed. That afternoon, my father called. Not texted, not messaged through my mother. He called. I don't understand why you're doing this, he said after a stiff hello. That's because you never asked, I replied. He sighed. Your sister is under a lot of pressure. So am I said. I just carry it quietly. He hesitated. You could have come to us first. I almost laughed. First, I said. I came to you for years. I just stopped expecting answers. He didn't deny it. That was worse than arguing. You're threatening the stability of the family, he said. No, I said, I'm revealing it. There was a pause. I could picture him rubbing his temple the way he always did when confronted with something inconvenient. What do you want? He finally asked. That was the question everyone asked when they realized I was serious. I thought about it carefully before answering. I want what's mine, I said. And I want my son to never have to beg this family for dignity again. He exhaled slowly. This will get ugly. It already was, I replied. You just laughed through it. That evening, my sister showed up at my house. No warning, no call. She stood on the porch like she owned it, arms crossed, jaw tight. You're enjoying this, she accused. I opened the door wider but didn't invite her in. No, I said. I'm surviving it. She scoffed. You're going to destroy everything Mom and Dad built. They built it on my back, I said quietly. And yours on top of mine. Her eyes flashed. You always play the victim. And you always play the heir, I shot back. Funny how that worked out. She leaned closer. If you don't back off, I'll make sure you get nothing. I smiled then. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. You already tried, I said. This time you're late. She stared at me, searching for the weakness she had relied on for decades. She didn't find it. You think you're smarter than us now, she asked. No, I said. I think I finally stopped being scared of you. That was the moment her confidence cracked. She left without another word. Over the next few weeks, things escalated quickly. My parents stopped calling altogether. Family group chats went silent. Invitations dried up. Birthdays passed without acknowledgement. The exclusion was deliberate, punitive. I let it happen. Because while they were freezing me out emotionally, my lawyer was warming up legally. Subpoenas followed, requests for documentation, quiet inquiries into how funds had been allocated over the years. Patterns emerged. Money moved in ways it shouldn't have, decisions made without proper disclosure, debt hidden behind optimistic projections. My sister called less. When she did, her voice was tight controlled. "You're hurting people," she said once. "People who laughed at my child," I replied. "Forgive me if my sympathy is limited." One night, my son sat beside me on the couch reading through some of the documents. "They never thought you'd fight," he said. "No," I agreed. "They thought I'd fold." He looked up. "Are you scared?" I considered it. "Yes," I said honestly, "but not of them." "What are you scared of?" "Of how long I let this go," I said, "and how close I came to teaching you that silence was strength." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you didn't," he said. So was I. The first real crack came when one of the company's lenders requested an audit. Then another. Then a board member quietly resigned. The house of cards didn't fall all at once. It leaned, it wobbled, it began to make noises only the people inside could hear. My mother called again after that. Her voice was softer, measured. "We need to find a way back to being a family," she said. I looked out the window as she spoke, watching leaves fall from a tree I had planted years ago. "Families don't laugh at their own," I said. "They don't erase contributions and call it order." She was quiet. "I don't recognize you," she said finally. I closed my eyes. "That's because you never looked," I replied. When the call ended, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, resolve. Because this was no longer about money or documents or meetings. It was about rewriting a story that had been told without my consent for far too long. And in the chapters ahead, they would learn what happens when the person cast as a footnote finally steps into the narrative and refuses to be edited out. The first settlement offer arrived on a Thursday morning disguised as civility. It came through my lawyer, of course, carefully worded, generous on the surface, an amount large enough to make most people hesitate. Large enough to make someone like the woman I used to be feel grateful. I read it twice, then a third time. "They think I'm tired," I said. My lawyer didn't smile. "They think you're practical." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "They think I want this to go away." "And you don't?" I thought of the dinner table, the laugh, the way my son's shoulders had stiffened like he was bracing for weather. "No," I said. "I want it to be remembered." We declined the offer. Politely, professionally, with a counterproposal that included transparency acknowledgement and retroactive compensation tied to actual company growth. That was when the tone changed. My sister stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding and started treating it like a war. She leaked stories. Nothing overt, just enough. Whispers to relatives. Comments slipped into conversations she knew would circle back to me. "She's always been jealous. She doesn't understand business. She's doing this because her son failed." That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it was designed to hurt where it always had. I found out about it at the grocery store. A woman I'd known for years, someone who used to compliment my baking at church events, leaned closer to me in the produce aisle. "I heard things are tense," she said. "Tense," I replied, "is one word for it." She hesitated. "You know, people are saying maybe you're pushing too hard." I smiled thinly. People who've never been pushed usually say that. She didn't know what to do with that. Neither did I, really. But I didn't apologize. I paid for my groceries and left. At home, my son was pacing again. "They called me," he said as soon as I walked in. "Who did?" "Grandma and Grandpa." My jaw tightened. "What did they say?" He exhaled sharply. "They wanted to talk about alternatives, suggested maybe I take time off, reconsider the partnership, be realistic." I closed my eyes. "They didn't mention the loan," he added, "not once." I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest. "Of course not. They said you're stressed, that you might be making decisions out of emotion." That made me laugh, not softly, out loud. "I've never been calmer," I said. "They just don't recognize me when I'm not compliant." He sat down, rubbing his temples. "I don't want to be the reason this gets worse." "You're the reason it gets better," I said. "They're just upset the script changed." That weekend, the company announced layoffs. Not many, just enough to rattle nerves. My sister blamed market conditions, global uncertainty, strategic realignment, but I knew what it was. Pressure. The lenders wanted reassurance. The board wanted clarity. And my quiet assertion of ownership had become a loose thread no one could ignore. Then came the invitation. Thanksgiving dinner. My mother's handwriting on the envelope looping and careful as if neatness alone could fix what had been fractured. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Do we go?" my son asked. "Yes," I said. Why? Because I want them to see me, I replied. And I want them to see that I'm not afraid to sit at that table anymore. Thanksgiving arrived cold and gray. The house looked the same. Same wreath, same china, same seating arrangement that had never quite fit me. My sister greeted us with a tight smile. "So glad you could make it," she said, her tone brittle. I met her eyes. I wouldn't miss it. Dinner was tense but polite. Conversations skated along safe topics. Weather, travel, a cousin's new job. No one mentioned the elephant sitting between the gravy boat and the cranberry sauce. Until my father cleared his throat. "We've been thinking," he said, "about the future." Everyone froze. My sister shot him a warning look. He ignored it. "We want peace," he continued. "This family has been through enough." I nodded, agreed. He seemed relieved. "Good. Then perhaps we can resolve this privately." My sister jumped in. "Without lawyers." I set my fork down gently. "No," I said. Silence. "This isn't a family squabble," I continued. "It's a business matter that became personal when you laughed at my child." My mother flinched. "That was not our intention," she said quickly. "But it was the impact," I replied. "And I'm done minimizing it." My sister scoffed. "You're exaggerating." I turned to her. "You laughed when he asked for help. Not money. Help. That's not exaggeration. That's memory." Her face flushed. "You always twist things. And you always erase them," I said. "We're even now." My father looked between us, his voice weary. "What will it take to end this?" I looked at the table, at the food, at the people who had shared my childhood and reshaped my adulthood without asking. "The truth," I said, "publicly, legally, and without conditions." My sister stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is insane," she snapped. "You're blowing up your own family." I stood too. "No," I said. "I'm refusing to be collateral anymore." My son stood beside me, not defiant, just present. "That's enough," my mother whispered. "No," I replied. "This is exactly enough." We left before dessert. In the car, my son let out a breath he'd been holding. "I thought I'd feel worse," he admitted. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Lighter," he said. So did I. The next morning, my lawyer called. "They're requesting mediation," she said, "with a neutral third party." I smiled. "They're running out of places to hide," I said. "Yes," she replied, "they are." I hung up and looked around my quiet kitchen. Sunlight streamed in through the window, catching dust motes in the air. For the first time since that dinner months ago, I felt something close to peace. Not because it was over, but because I knew without question now that whatever came next would happen on my terms. And that realization was worth more than any settlement they could ever offer. Mediation was scheduled for a Monday morning in a downtown office that smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. Neutral territory. That was the point. No family home, no company boardroom, no place layered with memory or power. I arrived early. My sister arrived late. She swept in wearing confidence like armor heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Her expression composed in that way that used to make people believe she was always winning. She didn't look at me, not once. She hugged our parents, whispered something to my mother, then sat down across the table, as if I were a stranger who had wandered into the wrong meeting. The mediator was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a voice that never rushed. He laid out the ground rules: respect, confidentiality. One person speaks at a time. My sister nodded enthusiastically. I noticed how tightly her hands were clasped. We began with statements. Her lawyer went first. Smooth, polished. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding, rooted in outdated documents and emotional reactions. I listened without interrupting. Then it was my turn. I didn't bring slides. I didn't bring drama. I brought facts. I spoke about my early work. The nights spent building systems that were still in use. The meetings where my ideas were praised and then quietly reassigned. The signatures I was encouraged to provide without full explanation. I spoke about stepping back for family reasons, about trusting that my contributions would be acknowledged later. I paused then, let the room breathe. And I spoke about the dinner, I said. My sister shifted. The laughter, I continued. The silence. The moment my child learned in front of everyone he loved exactly where he ranked. My mother looked down at her hands. That is not an emotional exaggeration, I said. It is the context that makes everything else impossible to ignore. The mediator nodded slowly. When I finished, no one spoke for several seconds. Then my sister laughed, softly, briefly, as if she couldn't help herself. "You're turning a family disagreement into a spectacle," she said. "This isn't about business, it's about resentment." I met her gaze. Resentment is what happens when truth is buried long enough to rot. Her lawyer cleared his throat. The mediator intervened gently. Let's focus on resolution. Offers were made, revised, rejected. Every number they put on the table told me the same thing. They wanted me quiet, not equal. At one point, my father leaned toward me. This has gone too far, he said under his breath. No, I replied just as quietly. It's finally gone far enough. By midday, mediation stalled. We broke for lunch. I stood by the window looking out at the city when my sister approached. You're enjoying this, she said again. No, I replied. I'm enduring it. She folded her arms. You're humiliating Mom and Dad. I turned to her. You did that the night you laughed. Her jaw tightened. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, but I won't regret staying silent anymore. She stared at me for a long moment, then spoke in a lower voice. You think you're the only one who sacrificed I carried this company on my back. You carried it on the foundation I built, I said. There's a difference. Her eyes flashed. You always needed credit. No, I said. I needed acknowledgement. The session resumed, still no agreement. By the end of the day, the mediator closed his folder. I recommend continued discussion, he said carefully. But if no compromise is reached, litigation may be unavoidable. My sister exhaled sharply. My mother looked as if she might cry. I felt strangely calm. That evening, my lawyer called me privately. There's something else, she said. Something we didn't bring up today. What? She hesitated. During discovery, we found irregularities. Not just accounting issues. Potential misrepresentation to lenders. My pulse quickened. How serious? Serious enough that if this goes to court, it won't stay a civil matter. I closed my eyes. This could ruin them, I said. It could, she replied, which is why they're desperate to settle. I didn't answer right away. That night, my mother called. Her voice was different, fragile. I didn't know, she said. About the paperwork, about your role. I sat at the kitchen table listening to the hum of the refrigerator. You didn't want to know, I said gently. She sobbed then, quietly, the sound of someone mourning something they could have protected but didn't. We raised you better than this, she whispered. You raised me to be fair, I replied. This is what fairness looks like when it finally speaks. There was a long silence. Your sister is afraid, she said finally. So am I said. But only one of us is willing to face why. When the call ended, I stared at my phone for a long time. I thought about my son, his future, the way he had stood beside me at Thanksgiving, not defiant, just present. I thought about how easily my sister had laughed, how naturally power had come to her. And I thought about the file my lawyer hadn't opened yet, the one marked with a simple note, potential leverage, use with care. The next morning I told my lawyer to proceed, not with threats, with truth. Because if this family was going to survive what came next, it would not be by pretending nothing had happened. It would be by finally paying the price for everything that had. The first subpoena arrived before my sister finished her morning coffee. I know this because she called me exactly 12 minutes after it was served. Her voice was no longer sharp. It was thin, controlled in the way people get when they are trying not to panic. You went too far, she said. I looked out the window at the quiet street, at the woman walking her dog, like nothing in the world was changing. No, I replied. I went where this was always heading. You told your lawyer to dig, she accused. I told her to tell the truth, I said. If digging was required, ask yourself why. She exhaled hard. You're threatening everything. I didn't correct her, because this time she was right. The following days unfolded slowly, then all at once. Banks requested clarifications. Auditors asked questions no one had answers for. The board postponed decisions, then canceled them entirely. The company issued a statement about routine reviews. No one believed it. My parents stopped answering calls from anyone outside the family. My mother didn't leave the house. My father began having what he called headaches and what I recognized as fear. And my sister started unraveling. She showed up at my door again, this time without confidence or armor. Her hair was pulled back hastily. Her eyes were red. You don't understand what you're doing, she said, stepping inside before I could stop her. I closed the door behind her. I understand exactly, I replied. She paced the living room. If this goes public, I lose everything. The company, the reputation, the board seats. Do you want to be responsible for that? I watched her carefully. The woman who had never asked for help, who had laughed at a child asking for mercy. I want accountability, I said. What you lose is up to you. She turned on me. You're enjoying the power. No, I said. I'm correcting an imbalance. She laughed bitterly. You always needed validation. And you always needed silence, I replied. You just mistook it for loyalty. She stopped pacing. Her shoulders sagged. What do you want? She asked quietly. I waited before answering. I want the truth acknowledged, I said. In writing, in public records. I want my ownership recognized. I want restitution tied to real numbers, not convenient ones. And I want my son's loan approved. No conditions, no humiliation. Her eyes widened. That's extortion. No, I said, that's repair. She stared at me for a long moment. You've changed, she said. Yes, I replied, I had to. She left without agreeing to anything. 2 days later, the story broke anyway. Not all of it, just enough. An anonymous source. Concerns raised. Internal review underway. My sister called me screaming. You leaked it, she shouted. I didn't, I said truthfully. Then who did? The truth doesn't belong to either of us anymore, I replied. She hung up. That evening, my son came home with a letter in his hand. They approved it, he said, disbelief in his voice. I looked at the letter. The loan. The terms fair. The tone respectful. They didn't laugh, he added softly. They didn't question me. I felt tears sting my eyes, not because of the money, because dignity had finally been restored. Whatever happens next, I said, remember this moment. He nodded. I will. The next week, my parents asked to meet. Neutral location, no lawyers. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. My mother reached for my hand. I let her. We failed you, she said. I didn't argue. I didn't console her either. We didn't think it would hurt you like this, my father added. You didn't think about me at all, I replied. That was the problem. They nodded, slowly. Your sister is afraid, my mother whispered. So is my son, I said, and no one protected him. My father swallowed. What happens now? That depends, I replied, on whether you want a family built on truth or convenience. They didn't answer right away. Outside, traffic passed. People lived their lives. Inside, something old and brittle finally cracked. That night, my lawyer called. They want to settle, she said. Fully. Public acknowledgement, back pay, ownership, governance changes. And the irregularities, I asked. Disclosed, corrected, penalties negotiated. I closed my eyes. And my son, the loan stands, she replied, already funded. I sat in silence after the call ended. This was the moment people imagine revenge to be loud and triumphant. It wasn't. It was quiet, heavy, final. Because winning doesn't feel like celebration when the cost is the family you once thought you had. But as I watched my son at the kitchen table reviewing his plans with steady hands and clear eyes, I knew something else just as surely. The cycle had been broken. They had laughed at a child asking for help. And in doing so, they had awakened a reckoning they could never control again. The tables had turned, and this time no one would be laughing. The settlement was signed on a Friday afternoon under fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. No champagne, no handshakes, just signatures, initials, and a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. My sister did not look at me once. Her lawyer slid the final document across the table. My lawyer nodded. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, as if reclaiming it from years of erasure. When it was done, my sister stood up immediately. This changes nothing, she said, more to herself than anyone else. I met her gaze for the first time that day. It changes everything. She scoffed and walked out. My parents lingered. My mother touched my arm. We're relieved, she said. I studied her face. Relief isn't repair. She flinched. What do you want from us now? I thought about that carefully. I want you to stop pretending this never happened, I said. And I want you to treat my son like he belongs. My father nodded stiffly. We will. I didn't say thank you. On Monday morning, the company issued a statement. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement. Early contributions recognized. Ownership clarified. Governance updated. My name was listed. I read it 3 times. Seeing it in public print felt surreal, like spotting yourself in a photograph you were told never existed. My phone buzzed constantly that day. Old colleagues, distant relatives, people who suddenly remembered my role now that it had been validated. I answered none of them. That evening, my sister posted a photo online. A vague quote about resilience, about rebuilding. Comments flooded in with support. I felt nothing. Because real accountability doesn't come with filters. A week later, I attended my first board meeting, not as an observer, not as a favor. As an owner, the room was different when I walked in. Not hostile, just alert. People sat up straighter, paid attention. My sister arrived late again. She took the seat farthest from me. We conducted business, numbers, strategy, recovery plans. When it was my turn to speak, the room listened. Not because they feared me, because they knew I was no longer invisible. After the meeting, one of the board members pulled me aside. We should have known, he said quietly. Your fingerprints are everywhere. I smiled politely. They usually are. At home, my son packed boxes. What are you doing? I asked. Preparing, he said. If this takes off, I'll need to relocate. Pride swelled in my chest. You're really doing this, I said. So are you, he replied. A month passed. The noise died down, the company stabilized, my sister retreated from public view. My parents tried awkwardly to reinsert normalcy. Invites to dinner, casual texts. I responded selectively. Healing, I had learned, was not the same as pretending nothing broke. One evening, my mother called. "Your sister is struggling," she said. I closed my eyes. I'm not her shield anymore. She's lost so much. She gained everything at my expense, I replied. This is balance. Silence. Then quietly, "Do you hate her?" I considered it. No, I said. I finally see her clearly. That winter, my son's business opened. Not with fanfare, just steady growth. He sent me a photo of the sign on the door freshly installed. I stared at it longer than I expected to. "This is because of you," he said later. "No," I replied. "This is because you refuse to shrink." Christmas came. For the first time, I declined the family gathering. Instead, my son and I cooked dinner together. Just us. We talked, we laughed, we rested. That night, as snow fell quietly outside, I felt something settle inside me. Not victory, freedom. Because revenge, the real kind, isn't about watching someone fall. It's about standing tall enough that they no longer cast a shadow over you. And for the first time in my life, I stood without flinching. The story wasn't over, but it was no longer theirs to control. I thought the quiet meant it was over. That was my mistake. January arrived with a thin layer of ice on everything, the kind that looks harmless until you step on it wrong. The company stabilized, my son's business gained traction, and my parents settled into a careful politeness that felt rehearsed but functional. My sister, however, disappeared. No calls, no messages, no passive-aggressive quotes online, just absence. That worried me more than her anger ever had. The first sign came in the mail, a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a document I recognized immediately, the original operating agreement. My stomach tightened as I read the handwritten notes in the margins. Not mine, my father's. Dates circled, percentages adjusted, a line under my name with a question mark beside it. I felt cold. They had been planning this long before the dinner, long before my son asked for help, long before I stopped being silent. This wasn't favoritism, it was premeditation. I called my lawyer. "She's not done," I said. "No," she agreed. "And now that she's lost publicly, she's likely to look for leverage privately." 2 days later, my brother called for the first time in months. "I think you should come by Mom and Dad's," he said. "There's something you need to see." I arrived to find my parents sitting at the dining table, pale and shaken. My sister stood by the window, arms crossed. "We need to clear the air," she said. I didn't sit. My father slid a folder toward me. Inside were documents I had never seen. Trust structures, asset transfers, amendments dated years back. My sister spoke before I could. "They were protecting the family," she said, "from instability." I looked at my parents. From me, my mother started to cry. My father's voice shook. "We didn't think you'd ever need it." Need it. The words landed hard. "You moved assets out of the company," I said slowly, "into private trusts, without disclosure." My sister lifted her chin. "It was legal." "Was it fair?" I asked. She didn't answer. My lawyer had warned me something like this might exist. Quiet safety nets. Backup plans for the golden child. What she hadn't prepared me for was how deeply it hurt to see it confirmed. "You were never supposed to find this," my mother whispered. That was the most honest thing she'd said in years. I closed the folder. "You tried to erase me twice," I said. "Once by neglect, once by design." My sister scoffed. "You're exaggerating again." I turned to her. "You moved money to keep control. That's not exaggeration. That's intent." She stepped closer. "You think this makes you righteous? You're still the one tearing the family apart." I met her eyes. "No, I'm the one refusing to hold it together with my silence." That night I didn't sleep again. But this time it wasn't rage or anxiety. It was grief. Grief for the parents I thought I had. Grief for the sister I hoped might change. Grief for the version of myself that believed loyalty would be returned in kind. The next morning I made a decision that surprised even my lawyer. "I want full disclosure," I said. "Everything, every trust, every transfer." She paused. "That will escalate things." "Yes," I said, "but it will also end them." When the request was filed, the reaction was immediate. My sister called, her voice sharp again. "You're going to expose Mom and Dad," she hissed. "They exposed themselves," I replied. "They'll never forgive you." "I stopped waiting for forgiveness the night you laughed," I said. The truth once pressed came out quickly. There were assets tied to conditions, clauses designed to trigger only under specific circumstances, provisions that favored one child's stability over another's autonomy. The favoritism had been formalized, documented, legal. My parents claimed fear. My sister claimed necessity. Neither claimed responsibility. At mediation again, my sister tried to frame it as protection. We didn't know what she'd do, she said. She's emotional. The mediator looked at me. Is that true? I smiled thinly. I'm emotional enough to read contracts. That broke something in the room. The revised settlement was brutal. Not vindictive, precise. Assets rebalanced, trusts amended, conditions removed. My parents signed with trembling hands. My sister refused at first. Then the lender called her bluff. She signed. Afterward, she cornered me in the hallway. You didn't have to destroy everything, she said. I looked at her, really looked. I didn't destroy it, I said. I survived it. She laughed hollow. You think this makes you whole? No, I replied. It makes me free. That spring, my parents downsized. They said it was practical. I knew it was symbolic. Power had shifted, quietly, permanently. My son expanded his business, hired his first employee, missed his first holiday because success demanded it. He called me late one night. I get it now, he said. Why you didn't fight before? And I asked. And why you finally did, he replied. I hung up and sat alone in the dark thinking about how revenge had never been my goal. Truth had been. And truth once uncovered changes everything it touches. The next chapter would not be about confrontation. It would be about consequence. Because when a family builds its future on exclusion, eventually the past comes back to collect. By the time the consequences arrived, no one could pretend they were accidental. They came quietly at first like letters no one wanted to open. Notices, resignations, invitations that never came. My sister stepped down from her executive role to focus on personal matters. That was the phrasing the press release used. The real reason was simpler. The board no longer trusted her judgment. Trust, I had learned, was currency. Once spent recklessly, it was nearly impossible to earn back. My parents' social circle thinned, not dramatically, just enough to notice. People who once lingered now kept conversations short. Questions were asked carefully. History was reevaluated. No one likes being associated with imbalance once it's named. One afternoon, my mother called. They look at us differently now, she said. I stared at the calendar on my kitchen wall. They always did, I replied. You just couldn't see it from the inside. She sighed. I wish I could go back. You can't, I said. But you can stop trying to rewrite what already happened. She was quiet. I don't know how to be your mother anymore, she admitted. That honesty hurt more than denial. You start by listening, I said, without correcting me. It took effort on her part. I could hear it. The pauses, the restraint. My father, on the other hand, withdrew. He attended meetings, he signed documents, he avoided conversation. The man who had once commanded rooms now preferred corners. My sister stopped calling altogether. I heard about her through others. She moved out of the house she once flaunted, sold off pieces of a lifestyle built on assumption. She was still comfortable, but no longer untouchable. For the first time in her life, she had to explain herself without a shield. I didn't gloat. I focused on building. I took my seat on this board seriously. I asked questions. I listened. I pushed for ethics policies that had once been dismissed as unnecessary. When someone asked why I cared so much about transparency, I answered honestly. Because opacity breeds abuse. No one argued. My son visited the office one afternoon. He watched quietly from the back of the room as I spoke. Later over coffee, he said, "They listen to you." I smiled. They hear me. There's a difference. That summer, my sister finally reached out. An email, short, unpolished. We need to talk. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied, yes, in person. We met in a small park halfway between our homes. She looked older, not physically, in the way people do when certainty drains out of them. She didn't sit at first, just stood there, arms wrapped around herself. I didn't think it would end like this, she said. I did, I replied, just not when. She laughed softly. You always were the patient one. I was the quiet one, I corrected. You mistook the two. She finally sat. I don't know who I am without all of it, she admitted. The company, the approval, being right. I watched her carefully. This isn't an apology, I said. No, she agreed, it's an explanation. I nodded. I already know. She looked at me. Do you hate me? I considered the question. No, I said, but I don't need you anymore. That landed hard. She flinched. You used to. Yes, I replied, and you used that. Silence stretched between us. I laughed because I was scared, she said finally. The money, the loan. I thought if I made it small, it wouldn't threaten me. I believed her. That didn't excuse it. You taught my son that asking for help was shameful, I said. That lesson almost cost him his future. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean to. Impact doesn't care about intent, I replied gently. She nodded. I'm trying to figure out how to live with this, she said. That's your work, I said, not mine. When we parted, there was no hug, just distance, earned and necessary. In the months that followed, life settled into something new. Not reconciliation, resolution. My parents learned to ask before assuming, to listen without defending. My sister learned limits, and I learned something else entirely. That revenge, when done right, doesn't leave you hollow. It leaves you aligned with truth, with self-respect, with the boundaries you once thought made you selfish. One evening, my son and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees. "Do you think they learned?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "What about you?" I smiled. "I learned I was never powerless," I said. "I was just patient." He nodded, thoughtful. The air cooled, the light faded, and for the first time since that dinner long ago, I felt no need to look back, because everything that mattered was finally standing in front of me. The hearing was scheduled for early fall, long after most people assumed the story had ended. That was the thing about consequences. They rarely arrive when the audience is still watching. By then, the company had stabilized under new leadership protocols. My sister no longer held an executive title, though she remained a shareholder under stricter oversight. My parents had retreated into a quieter life, one that fit them better than the stage they once commanded. But one unresolved thread remained. The trust amendments. The transfers had been corrected on paper, assets, rebalanced, ownership clarified. Yet the manner in which those decisions had been made years earlier still mattered. Not emotionally, legally. The lender had questions, so did the regulatory board. And when questions pile up long enough, someone eventually has to answer them under oath. I didn't ask for the hearing, but I didn't stop it either. The morning of it, I dressed carefully, not to impress, to feel grounded. Neutral colors, comfortable shoes, no armor, no costume. My son walked me to the courthouse steps. "You don't have to go in," he said. "Your part's done." I shook my head, "Not yet." Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. Intimate. No drama. Just wood benches, a raised desk, and a judge who looked like he'd seen every version of human rationalization. My parents sat behind me. My sister sat across the aisle. She didn't look at me. When my name was called, I stood. I spoke plainly, no embellishment, no outrage. I explained my role in the company's founding. The expectations set, the assurances given, the gradual sidelining that followed. I explained the dinner. Yes, that dinner. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Why does that matter?" "Because it revealed intent," I said. "Not just neglect, but confidence that no challenge would follow." He nodded slowly. Then my sister took the stand. She spoke of fear, of pressure, of the need to protect stability. She spoke of me as unpredictable, emotional, unreliable. The judge listened, asked questions, took notes. Then he asked one thing that shifted the room. "If you believed she was incapable, why did you use her work?" Silence. My sister opened her mouth, closed it. "I didn't think she'd ever claim it," she said finally. The truth slipped out so easily it startled even her. The hearing ended without spectacle. No shouting, no collapse, just a quiet conclusion. Findings would be issued later, penalties assessed, compliance required. We left separately. Outside, my mother touched my arm. "I didn't know it would come to this," she said. I looked at her tired face, the lines deeper now. "It came to this because it had nowhere else to go," I replied. That night I slept deeply. The next morning I woke to a message from my lawyer. "Findings in our favor. Sanctions limited but formal. Record corrected permanently." I read it twice. Not because I doubted it, because finality still felt unfamiliar. A week later, my sister sent another email. "I owe you an apology." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I replied, "You owe yourself accountability. Apologies come after." She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. That winter, my son's business crossed its first major milestone. He called me, voice unsteady with excitement. "We did it," he said. "We're profitable." I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "I never doubted you," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's the difference." We celebrated quietly. Dinner at home, no fanfare, just presence. Later that night, he asked, "Do you wish it had ended differently?" I thought about my parents, my sister, the years of silence. "No," I said. "I wish it had ended honestly sooner." He nodded. The world did not reward me with applause. It rewarded me with peace. Invitations came less often, but they were sincere. Conversations changed. People asked instead of assumed. My parents tried haltingly to build something new with me, slower, less certain, but real. My sister remained distant. That was not a failure. That was a boundary holding. One afternoon, I found myself back at my parents' old dining table, now smaller, tucked into a downsized living room. No tension, no performance. Just tea. My mother looked at me and said I didn't see you before. I met her gaze, I was there. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I see you now. That was enough. Because recognition, when it finally comes, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true. And as I walked home that evening, coat pulled tight against the cold, I realized something else. The story I had been living was never about revenge. It was about reclamation. Of voice, of agency, of the right to be counted. And in the final chapter, I would decide what came next. The last time I sat at that table, no one laughed. That detail matters. It was spring again, nearly a year since the dinner that changed everything. The same parents' house, though it felt smaller now. Or maybe I had finally grown into my own space. The table was set for a birthday, mine. That alone would have been unthinkable once. My mother had cooked. Nothing elaborate. Just the dishes she knew I liked, not the ones that impressed guests. My father moved more slowly now, careful with his steps, careful with his words. My sister was not there. That was intentional. She had been invited, she declined. No excuses, no drama, just distance. I respected that more than forced reconciliation. My son sat beside me, relaxed, confident, the quiet assurance of someone who had learned he did not need permission to exist fully. Halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat. I want to say something, he said. I waited. For a long time, he continued, we confused order with fairness. We thought keeping things smooth meant keeping things right. He looked at me then, directly. We were wrong. My mother reached for my hand. Her grip was gentle, uncertain. I thought protecting the family meant protecting one version of it, she said. I didn't understand the cost. I nodded. Not absolution, acknowledgement. I'm not asking you to forget, my father added. I'm asking you to know we finally understand. I took a breath. This isn't about understanding anymore, I said. It's about how we move forward. They listened. That too mattered. After dinner, my son helped clear the table. I watched him laugh with my parents, easy and unguarded, and felt something deep in my chest finally unclench. Later, after we left, he said, I don't think they'll ever be the same. No, I agreed, but neither will we. And that was the point. In the weeks that followed, life settled into its new shape. The company moved forward without chaos. Ethics committees became routine, not symbolic. Decisions were documented. Transparency was no longer treated like a threat. I remained on the board not because I needed the power, but because I understood the responsibility. My sister sold a portion of her shares, stepped back further, reinvented herself quietly away from the spotlight that had once defined her. We spoke once more, briefly, cordially. No forgiveness ceremony, no emotional climax, just truth acknowledged and space respected. My parents adjusted, slowly. They learned to ask rather than assume, to include rather than manage. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. One evening, months later, my son and I sat in his office after closing hours. The lights were low, the hum of success steady but not loud. I've been thinking about that night, he said. The dinner. I nodded. I used to replay it in my head, he continued, wondering what I did wrong. My chest tightened, and now I see it wasn't about me, he said. It was about who they thought they were. I smiled. That realization, I said, will protect you for the rest of your life. He leaned back in his chair. You know what the real revenge was. What? You didn't become them. I laughed softly. No, I said, I became myself. That was the ending. No one applauds. No viral moment. No dramatic collapse. Just a woman who stopped shrinking. A family forced to confront its own mythology. And a son who learned that dignity is not something you borrow. It's something you claim. If you're listening to this story, and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, let me say this clearly. Silence is not strength when it protects injustice. Patience is not virtue when it teaches others to erase you. And family does not mean submission. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not destruction, it's reclamation. Of your voice, your worth, your place at the table. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been laughed at, dismissed, or quietly written out of your own life, you are not alone. Share your thoughts, leave a comment, let your story be heard. And if you want more stories like this, stories about karma, justice, and the quiet power of women who finally say enough, make sure you stay with us. Because the moment you stop accepting less than you deserve is the moment everything begins to change.